Everyone, and welcome to our Creating a Thriving Culture in a Remote First World. I have got some amazing panelists here with me to help us navigate this world. But just quickly, a quick introduction. It's quite unbelievable, really, but we're sort of 6 months from when we first went into lockdown. And we shared some quite unhappy news last week around employee happiness across the globe. So just so everyone is aware, the Happiness Index collects data on how employees are feeling across about 95 countries now. And I just want to pick out the 5 main themes, which is employees are worried about the continued uncertainty of the future. Some are struggling to manage workload and take time off. Rising stress and anxiety impacting mental health. Point number 4, confusion and lack of clarity. For example, what can I do? When can I do it? And probably the most obvious one in there that I'm personally missing is social interaction and workplace environment. So I just wanted to bring them out, not to depress everyone or make everyone sad that's listening, but to show everyone the scale of the challenge that we have in front of us. And this is when I feel this is when leadership counts at its most, not in the easy times, but in the really tough times. So I've got Katie, Valerie and Noel here to help us navigate through this. So let's do intros. Valerie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Valerie Mann, a Director of People at Elder. And Elder is a scale-up really specialized in living care for elderly people, and with a very disruptive mission of reinventing what it means to age. And I joined Elder about a month ago now.
Wow. How, Valerie, I know this is, again, we're not onto the questions yet, but how important was that vision in recruiting you into that business? Because that's quite
fundamental, really, literally fundamental. It was something that was very close to my heart. And I think close to a lot of people's heart in that business. So that mission was, I'm very close to elderly people, just generally, and charities with around elderly people. And so that was just perfect for me, really.
Thanks, Valerie. Noel, in your spaceship somewhere in London?
That's right, yeah. I get beamed up halfway through our conversation. So Noel McGonigle, I'm the HR Director at Savills, the property company. I'm responsible for Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and Savills covers the full range of property services across the private and public sectors.
No, you describe those areas like they're a small part of Wales or something. Like that's a big region. How do you have a team across that remote team across that region, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we've got nearly 9,000 employees across the region in 18 countries. So we are quite well spread, and I guess we've got a mixture of business partners in country and then centres of excellence around things like learning and development, recruitment and that sort of thing. So we're about 70 people all together in the HR team, covering the full range of services.
Thanks, Noel. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Jacobs. I work at the CIPD. My role is at the CIPD is that I look after our leader populations, kind of CPO level, and I also do a lot of writing, thinking and speaking about work and business, because I'm also a business journalist and writer.
Katie, another quick question before we get into the actual questions. You're in a unique position where you speak to the HR community a lot, and I've obviously just shared sort of like how some of the employees are feeling. We often see that sometimes HR professionals are the unhappiest people in our data for various different reasons. The main one being where they don't feel like if they're in a business where they don't feel like they can have impact, it can hit their happiness quickly. How are senior HR professionals feeling in your opinion at the moment?
Really, really tired. I'm sure that Valerie and Noel can attest to that just really exhausted. But on the positive side, I think, and maybe this is something we can get into in the discussion, but I think that's something positive to come out of the pandemic for the profession is that the kind of credibility has never been higher within businesses, because a lot of the CHROs that I know are leading or co-leading the organisational response, and so the value of the people stuff has kind of never been clearer. So actually the profession's in a pretty strong position coming out of this. Obviously on a personal level, people are pretty burnt out and exhausted.
Right. Thanks, Katie. And also I want to give a shout out to the Pig Hotel, which have lent me their greenhouse to present from. So that little interruption about 30 seconds ago was Hayley bringing me my coffee in the middle of the garden.
Nice.
So,
great service.
if you can, go and stay in the Pig Hotel because they're giving me a free meeting room.
I was going to say, there are worse hotels to be stuck in.
Exactly. And she said as she came in, the coffee's for free because she forgot. So far I've spent zero money. So I promise to come and spend some money in there in a bit. Guys, so I thought asking you all these questions 6 months ago might have been an easy one, or maybe it is the same question. But let's jump into the first one, which is, what is culture and why is it important?
And you want me to start?
Yeah, I could tell you were ready for that one, Valerie.
Well, I had thought lots of great answers for this and the usual and what what culture is defined as. But really, I woke up this morning and thought, well, culture for me is the glue. It's basically what glues a company together, an organization together, and in the good and the bad times, that's what we go back to as a point of reference and and I think just talking to people recently at Elder, it's what helped them through, and many companies really is what has helped them through this really hard times, as well as the success they've had so far. So it's of course behaviors, beliefs, but for me, I would define it as the glue.
So do you think, Valerie, on that, to take that forward a little bit, do you think companies that haven't had a strong culture have struggled more in the last 6 months? Would you say? Yeah,
I think it's been kind of obvious throughout the news and what we've seen, and we've seen very quickly the companies who had that strong value and those strong values and that strong culture come to the fore and take positions in the various themes that we've seen throughout. And I think all these issues of engagement and trust and which have obviously again come to the fore will have been so obvious in companies where that culture is not strong.
Noel, anything to add, especially considering the different regions you're working across? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think glue is a good description. I think we've just been through the fastest and the quickest sort of cultural realignment program that probably any organisation has been through in sort of 6 months, where most organisations went from being primarily office-based to home-based in weeks or less than a week. So I think without really strong culture, people would really struggle in that change, because you lost everything that was sort of, if you like, the bricks and mortar part of your culture and the social interaction, and all you had to fall back on was, why you joined the company and what you felt about it and what it meant to you. And I think without strong culture, that's when people have struggled during this period, because they've got no life raft to hang on to when they're going through this very tough period. And I think it is what sustained the best organisations, because without it, you're nothing.
Katie, anything on this one?
I'll just echo Valerie. I think glue is a really nice way of putting it. I kind of think of it as a thread that runs through and connects everything, and it's the how everything gets done, and those values and behaviours that underpin everything. And on what's the last 6 months have taught us, what I think I've seen is that it hasn't necessarily changed cultures, but what it has done is kind of put a spotlight on or exposed the good and the bad. So anything that a company or organisation is particularly proud of or feels is a really positive part of their culture, I think that's really, really come to the fore. Like Noel's saying, it's one of those things that we have to fall back on when we haven't got the kind of the social interaction. But equally, anything that's not so good, that's probably become more obvious. There's almost nowhere to hide anymore. So I would say that what the pandemic has done is exposed kind of the good, the bad and the ugly of corporate cultures. But a lot of it has been really, really positive. And I've seen anecdotally through my conversations with HRDs and I don't know if Valerie and Noel have seen this in their organizations, that actually the kind of engagement and motivation and how people feel about the company has actually improved and is really strong, and people feel that leaders have done really well through this. I think what's going to be more challenging in the kind of 6 months to come is how you maintain that when it's getting dark, it's getting cold, and kind of our well-being is going to shift because of the external context as much as anything the organization is doing.
So Katie, you as an expert journalist should do, you've done my job for me, which is you've already got into the second question. Why you're better at this than me?
I share a lot of panels, Matt. We'll swap if you want.
Just WhatsApp me if you've got things I could improve on. Do it like live coaching. So on to that Katie's point there, how is it created and how is culture created and sustained? And also, Valerie, you've presumably been onboarded virtually, but how can we sustain this? And can we do it remotely is the question.
So I think having worked with scale ups over the past few years now, and and bigger companies in the past, it really starts with that CEO, that founder. I mean, Matt, you're well placed to know that and to create that. I think that it really starts with that, and with their drive and their passion and what they want to create, and permeates then throughout the business. And so I've been lucky to live through and learn about this startup scale up world, where it's so much tighter and so much more visible, and the role of the leadership is easier to permeate through the organization compared to bigger ones where I've been and where Noel can testify to. And I think there's two things, right? There's a pandemic and there's a crisis, which we've been through, and where everybody's leaned in and had to, and increase that trust and transparency, and that figure, that culture figure of the CEO and the leadership team has been super important. And as we continue, when you look at the issues that people have been facing, the survey you had, we had a very similar survey. Super strong culture, mission-driven culture at Elder, but really struggling with mental health and with this cross-team collaboration, which would impact a scale-up at regardless of working from home or not. That's that stage. And so the way I'm looking at it is, I think it can be sustained, but it has to continue being a concerted effort, or not an effort actually. It has to be a concerted strategy and not an effort anymore. Something that gets ingrained into that culture. And as Katie mentioned, you're not changing the culture. You're adapting it in a certain way. And I think, again, I was thinking about what's that big change also from a cultural perspective, and I wanted to summarize it as the revenge of the introverts. Where before, when we were in the office, the introverts were kind of suffering somewhat from the extroverted, let's go crazy in the office place, especially in startup and scale-ups. And what I'm seeing is that it's now the extroverted people who are suffering, and we need to. And so that hybrid mode, I think, will help. That lots of companies are looking for. Noel, you mentioned that. I think will help adjust. Well, we talk about that later.
That's something we have seen in our database, specifically from engineers.
Yeah.
So engineers were typically in the sort of bottom three with HR professionals. I hate always saying that.
Such a miserable crowd.
but have risen into the top two, which again we haven't done a deeper dive into that yet. But has anyone got thoughts on Valerie's point there of the sort of flip between introverts and extroverts, and whether that's a work from home thing or not, or any interesting points on it?
I think, well, as an extrovert, definitely just want to go for lunch with somebody. But I think in some ways I can see that point, but in some ways there's a little bit underneath it. I think maybe a bit simplistic, because I think for introverts, actually, some of the online stuff is actually quite challenging. It's quite hard to push yourself into an online meeting, and I think we'll come on to this when we start talking about hybrid working a little bit more. But I think what becomes really, really clear is how important it is to have good management and a good chair. So when you're running stuff virtually, I think it becomes even more important that you really think about how do you get everybody to have their say. And the thing is, if you're very introverted, you can almost opt out of doing anything. You know, you never put your camera on, and you perhaps kind of opt out of attending any of those enforced fun type company quizzes and stuff that's happening. So in a way, I think what becomes more important is the quality of that kind of individual people management. And I think the difference of experience that we've all had through this pandemic, I mean, there's lots of kind of writing and thinking going on about the kind of, we're all in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And, you know, some of us are working from our lovely home offices and some people are working on the end of their beds. But a lot of it also just comes down to the quality of the management that you have and that relationship with your manager. And if you're not kind of being asked to put yourself forward and to contribute, then I think there is a genuine risk that some people fade so far into the background that perhaps you almost forget that they're there. So I think Valerie's got a good point. It is easier for some introverts because they're not dealing with the people like me shouting in the office and being really annoying. But I think you have to just kind of make a more concerted effort to make sure that everybody feels included, because otherwise it's about you choosing to push yourself forward, and some people just aren't comfortable doing that.
Noel, have you got any experience in that area across your employees and getting the different personalities to feel comfortable?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff, sort of good commentary there. I think it's interesting for me. What I think we've seen a bit more of the rise of is the leader as a figurehead. So I think before the pandemic, you know, there was a lot of talk about servant leadership and models like that, where in a sense the cult of the leader was fading into the background. And I think what people have looked for more in this situation is that figurehead, that sort of beacon that they can rely on. So the sort of company communication, the style of the communication, that sort of interaction from managers, and Katie's exactly right. You know, if your managers aren't on it, particularly as we go into this winter period where people are becoming more detached, some people may not have been back in the office yet. And just as they were sort of gearing up to come back to the office, we're sort of going backwards in a way. You know, we may get another lockdown, we may not. You know, a lot of people are starting to get anxious about the thought of lockdown in the winter. So I do think that leadership has had to step up and become much more proactive than when we were all together in an office, or even in a region where you had more regular face-to-face contact. I think managers have definitely had to work a lot harder, and that's probably why everyone's probably a little bit tired than they would be normally, because, you know, you've just got so much more to do. Because what it feels like at the moment is you've sort of got your COVID jobs and then you've got your day job. And for some in HR, that's sort of become blended. But for people in business, that's become, you know, it's hard to get to clients. Not all clients are active in the market. And then your team needs bringing along and looking after and managing in a much more proactive way. So I think it has changed the way we work, and that sort of good meeting management on the various sort of media. In fact, I've seen more people almost going back to audio as a sort of new way of connecting, because that sort of Zoom and Teams, you're all sort of like just so yesterday now, and it's been hard. But I think you just got to keep changing it up. You just got to keep it fresh. But you've got to keep thinking and working as a leader as to what do we need to do now? What are we doing next? And as I said, I think people are looking to people to be leaders now and step up.
So Noel, I'm gonna take your challenge there, and I'm gonna challenge all three of you by chucking a new question in that we hadn't pre-planned. So I'm away at the moment writing up our book on happiness with all the data in it. And one of the things that one of our data scientists found as we were looking at all the exit survey data around why people leave companies. And the Billy Ocean lyric, when the tough get going, the going get tough. Well, it turns out it's basically the opposite, is what we found, is that when people don't feel like the challenge is sustained and they're continually developing and learning, they're leaving businesses. In a more virtual world, how do you show people that they're continually progressing? Because it's much more difficult, I would imagine, when you can't see people to do that. So this is an unplanned one. I can see some thinking faces here. But anyone got any thoughts on that little bit of nugget data we found last week?
I don't think that's new. I think the best people have always gone first if they're not being challenged and stimulated by the organisation, because they're confident that they can, and they're happy to go and sort of push themselves out there to look for something else. I think in this virtual world, it's not different. I think it comes back to the same thing. It's all about the quality of the conversations that managers have with the people. Whether it's remotely, if you are managing teams in different countries, you still have that challenge of space where actually the quality of the conversation and your interest in that person, your interest in their career, what they wanted to do, where they wanted to go, what sort of things were interesting for them. I think maybe it's been exacerbated by this because people have reassessed their value, if you like, or what are they getting out of their current role. Maybe there's a bit of that going on. But I think the principle of how do you make sure that your best people are engaged and motivated and getting what they want from you and the work, I don't think that's changed.
Thanks. Okay, to you were about to jump in. I'm going to rewind later to see who was supposed to jump in first there, and I'll let you know who was off the quickest.
I was just going to say that I think you just have to be kind of more deliberate about quite a lot of things when it's virtual. I think Noel is right, and for kind of certain type of person that will always be the way that that people work. Where I have concerns is for younger people who are less experienced in the workplace, and you're probably going to get less of those opportunities where you might just be asked, oh, why don't you come in and shadow me to this meeting? This might be useful for you to hear. Why don't you why don't you just come along and just sit and watch this and take notes and learn from it? So I just think you have to be a little bit more deliberate in creating those opportunities, because they're going to probably happen less by chance. And again, that just comes down to good people management and actually thinking hard about people and thinking about career development by choice and by thinking about it properly, rather than by, an HRD I was speaking to used the brilliant phrase career management by presenteeism, as a worry that when we're in the office, people who are in the office just get invited into stuff or given opportunities. So just to be very clear that is a risk, and then mitigate that risk by being more deliberate and planning around it.
And does that, Katie, does that work both ways? Do if, let's say we've got some people listening that are starting out in their career, do they need to keep putting their hand up and saying, Katie, I know you're hosting that event this evening, could I come along and help you? Does that need to happen?
Yeah, I do think some of it is on the individual, but I think as a kind of, you think about power structures within organisation and within life, it's probably more incumbent on the person in the position of power to distribute those opportunities. But obviously, if you're ambitious, put yourself forward, be annoying, put your hand up all the time.
And that's one of the reasons we chose to come back into the office in the model that we're in now, is just trying to make sure that our sort of new talent is getting that development opportunity that's harder to give when you're all remote.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you were right, Katie, on the spontaneity, like versus really being very planful. Having just joined completely remotely and not met anybody, and trying to find my way throughout the organization in a virtual way is quite fascinating. So I still have a massive. So I'm really thinking about all the other 20 or 30 people who have joined before me, a lot of them quite young, and how they're forming a picture of the organization without seeing it, apart from all hands and 100 faces on a Zoom meeting. And so I think there is very much this deliberate, there's a piece around the communication and being a lot more obvious around opportunities, which we would have needed to do anyway in the previous world, but being a lot more deliberate indeed and visible, because otherwise people just miss it. It's so easy to miss. And in a dispersed environment like what Noel has and what I used to have at HomeAway, it was easy to miss on those opportunities too. Those different, if you were in HQ, your chances were a lot higher than if you were in little Italy office with 3 people. But it was down to, as you said, the merger conversations, the frameworks and the processes that we had in place to make sure that we had that calibration, we had that visibility from everybody, and that really helped us. And I think we can do that virtually too.
I think there's the whole follow-up here session on Katie's point on power structures as well. Even in my research recently, I found that if you boost lobsters with serotonin boosts, an unconfident lobster can rise to the top of the hierarchy. And it's just unbelievable when you start getting into all that and the neuroscience and everything. We should definitely come back to that. We've sort of answered the second half of this question, which is, I'll read it out and then I think we should just jump to the second part. But how have workplace structures fared through the pandemic, and what lessons can we take into the next stage where remote working will remain the norm for many of us? I think I'd rather focus on the lessons that we can learn. I think we've talked about how companies have fared. Any lessons that we should be taking forward?
We've just done I'm just going to plug a piece of research that we've just done in the next couple of weeks.
I've plugged the Pig Hotel, you can plug your research.
So we've been working for the past few months on a piece on responsible business and trustworthy leadership through coronavirus, where we interviewed about 60 business leaders and also HR leaders. And one of the things to come through from that quite strongly is this emergence of this kind of more human and more humane leadership style. So I think Noel is totally right, and there's definitely a lot in that when we're in times of vulnerability and uncertainty, we look to leaders to give us some kind of certainty that they will be able to lead us out of this terrible situation to something better. But I think what's come through really strongly in this research and a lot of the conversations that I'm having is, number one, the kind of the leveling impact of a lot of people working from home, and you're literally invited into somebody's house. And even though different people are having different experiences, and some houses are, nicer and safer and more appropriate environments than others, ultimately you've met, I've met HR directors' children, I've met their pets, their partners. You're getting the Amazon delivery like at the door when you're in the middle of a conversation or a session like this. So it's almost led to a needing a necessary kind of putting aside of more corporate professionalism, and this kind of more human, bringing your real self to work or workplace or whatever. Work is a thing that you're doing, right? Not a place that you're going right now, especially. So I think that's one. And also Noel mentioned this servant leadership model. And I think, although his point was that we are looking to leaders for certainty, which is definitely true, what we definitely saw through this research is that where leaders have been perhaps most successful is where they're willing to admit that they don't know what they don't know. And obviously there has to be like a lot of devolving of decision making, because there just hasn't been the time to kind of go through all the bureaucracy and all the levels of sign-off that you might have done beforehand. But also the fact that leaders have had to say, you know, I don't have all the answers, because nobody's got all the answers right now. And I think if we could hold on to that more human and humane kind of leadership, that would be a real positive to come out of this. I'm really sorry, my Teams keeps going off, so let me just put it on do not disturb.
Totally agree, Kate. I mean, that's happiness, and that's what we call freedom to be human. So yeah, fingers crossed that does happen.
I think that's all, well, for me, that's always been part of, you know, the best leaders have always been comfortable being vulnerable and admitting that they don't know everything, and therefore being able to engage their team more and bring them to be part of the decision making, rather than, you know, I'll make the decisions and you just ask how high you have to jump. So I think you're right, Katie, this has really sort of brought that out, because, you know, people have been ill, they've had family who are ill, they've been scared, they've been, you know, uncertain. So I think it's almost, so I've got a military background, I've served in some conflict zones, and it's very similar in that sort of, if you like, that threat to everybody's sort of lifestyle and livelihood is probably the first time for a lot of leaders in these organisations that they've had to think about the risk to their people. That, you know, that wasn't part of the contract before. And I think particularly when it comes to opening back up the office and how you keep your people safe, as a leader, you've now got a new level of duty of care. Duty of care really means something now. And so that sort of human side, that real consideration for people, I think has really been brought forward in this.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Noel. And I think maybe on going back to Katie's point on the decision-making part and the you know, bringing the decision-making down the organization, I think that also has come very naturally with leaders needing to really trust, like leaders not having all the answers, trust that everybody was still doing what they had to do, and then naturally the conversations that we're having today are around that trust, and that the fact that other people may well help with those decisions and with bringing different ideas and perspectives. But this is also what is going to help with the other piece that has suffered, is the cross-functional collaboration and the collaboration between teams and moving away from this silo. And this, you know, this is where we're going to really see a lot of conversations around agile and self-managed teams, because in many ways this is a great segue to it.
Yeah, which is a good segue for me to skip a question and jump on, actually. Oh, and by the way, look, you know, like in the films where they light a baddie like halfway down their face, I can do that.
Oh yeah, look at that.
So yeah, I wanted to go on to, there's a really cool MIT study out there that I recommend everyone reads, but it's research into proximity, and they actually used the MIT labs, and they were looking into how many more like patents were produced based on proximity within the MIT buildings, and what the study showed, and we'll put the link in the follow-up, is that the closer that you are to someone, the better and easier it is to collaborate, and you're more likely to come up with good ideas. So, but that's the research, and I think the default in people's head is to think, oh, we have to do that in an office because that's what we think. So I think it's a really good example of having research that shows that humans do collaborate better when they're in the same room, but it doesn't. And the example I always use is, a little while ago, the government was sort of passively aggressively trying to push everyone back into the offices. And I can't remember which person it was, but they said something like, you can't get that vibe unless you go back into the office. But I would argue that the office isn't always the best place if you want to get a vibe. So I don't know many friendship groups that go and hang out in an office for 8 months, so for eight hours, if they want to hang out and get a vibe. But putting that aside, because there's obviously, this isn't an office versus not office debate. If we know about that proximity thing, how can we create a culture that encourages creative thought and collaboration? Because, and I'll probably go to you, Noel, first, because you've got people spread out anyway, haven't you? So that they may not ever be in the same office, even if you had offices all open. Have you got ways that you can foster that collaboration? And does that study resonate with you at all?
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things we noticed during lockdown was that probably the individual teams were still continuing to be successful with their clients. Where we weren't doing quite so well is, I guess, like a lot of consultancies, selling multiple products into clients and solving all of the client's problem, if you like, because you didn't have all of the teams necessarily thinking about working together in the way that, you know, those coffee conversations happen when you're in the office and you bump into people and you start to talk about things. So I think that collaboration had always been going on sort of virtually anyway in the multinational teams, and it's definitely been a case of sort of continuing to sort of build on that and improve on it, and get people to think about creative ways to sort of have that collaboration without necessarily being in the office. And actually, we've probably been making use of a bit more outdoor space, because practically you could have more people could get together outside than they could inside. And actually, when the weather was good, you know, actually people meeting up and going for walks and things like that worked really well in terms of fostering collaboration. And we had like project groups coming together to go for walks in parks just to share ideas and things like that. And that worked really well, actually. So it has been a case of trying to come up with, you know, what's the alternative to sort of getting people in the office and being a bit smarter about that.
Do you think that will stick, Noel? Like I've been a big fan of the sort of walking meeting for a while, when you've just got back-to-back meetings. Do you see that sort of coming through a bit more at Savills? Do you think that will be one of the leftover good things?
Yeah, I hope. Well, you hope so, don't you? I think it's like all of these things, like the fact that, back to Valerie's point about trust, you know, we've sort of broken the myth of working from home in a week. You know, organisations all went home and the world didn't stop. You know, managers have coped. They've realised actually people do work perfectly well if you trust them. So I hope a number of these things will stick now as better ways of working or other ways of working, and actually, you know, people found them fun as well. You know, that you're just a bit more creative when you're outside in a different environment. I think, you know, the office can actually, I think sometimes can sort of kill that creativity if you're not careful.
Yeah. Let's watch Valerie, by the way.
Oh, thanks, Casio. Plug. Just on that note, and it's a bit tactical, but it's an observation I've made, because we're obviously very keen to have that creativity and collaboration, and you know, our CEO is desperate for that to be in a room, and I really relate to that. But one thing that I noticed is that in a virtual world, you basically stack your calendar with Zoom meetings or meetings, right? And even those meetings are run like doing meetings, or, you know, we're going to talk about these results, or we've got to do this. But I haven't seen yet a creativity, like pure free form, where we actually take the time meeting. What, you know, those meetings that we used to have, right? We used to say, okay, we're going to have, you know, half a day and really free form. Let's just get this problem and get our brains going, and we can still talk to one another. We can still have post-it notes. We can still use the tools we have online. But what we don't seem to do is say it's okay to take that time. It's not pleasant. It's Zoom. It's being in front of the screen. But at least take the time. And I think that's
Sorry to interrupt, but there's obviously there's the virtual whiteboards out there. There's some really good ones, but so it's obviously not a technology reason. Why do you think people are not doing that? Because it's a really good point you make.
I think it's not knowing about them, a bit of a fear. It's still not as great as literally writing on the board and having fun, but I discovered them through my coaching training, really, where our head trainer is so used to running this coaching training virtually that she's got all these fantastic tools, and it becomes very natural. It's not quite the same, obviously. It really isn't, but there's so much out there that even looks funky. Like I discovered Wonder a couple of days ago, which makes you even see who joins what table when you're at the World Cafe setup. I mean, it's just crazy what's there. But yes, you don't have that, human interaction, but the time.
And whilst we're on the tactical Miro and Google Jamboard are really good for that, for anyone that's listening.
I think one of the issues is that we've basically taken old ways of working and smashed them into a new way of working world. I mean, Valerie's totally right in that I found my diary is more regimented now than it was when I was allowed to go out and do stuff and see people, because I would have space within that time to walk between one office or go to another office, go sit in a coffee shop, and now it's kind of expected that you'll just be sat in front of the screen all day, so every kind of 10 minutes is accounted for. And I think that's a kind of ways of working and a management issue that that we all kind of need to take some responsibility for. I think the why it doesn't work so well in person, so well virtually, for me, I think there's a kind of an energy issue there. I think when you're doing something like this, I am transmitting at you, but I'm not getting any of the energy as an extrovert I would leech off you if we were in person, and I would, steal some of the energy and I would feel really energized after the meeting. But when we do something like this, I'm just giving and not getting anything back. And for me, that is the major issue. That means a day of sitting in front of the screen is, I think, always just going to make me feel more tired than a day of being around people. And I think it's, as Valerie's saying, it's not creating the space or putting the time or the permission in to just be like, I'm just going to think or go for a walking meeting or talk to, or just kind of brainstorm in that time. We seem to have lost a bit of that, and perhaps some of that is the crisis management, because we've just been so focused on getting through one day to the next. But I think now potentially there's room for a little bit more breathing space, because organizations are going to have to think a lot more carefully and more considered about how you make this work for the long term, and also about, what your future operating model is and how you're going to be sustainable, and you need to be innovative for that.
Katie, just to drill down on one of those points, which I thought was brilliant, is around how you said, like, it's expected of us to have sort of like back-to-back Zoom meetings. Do you think that's something that we've just built up in ourselves as opposed to an external thing? Do you think it's just like that? We all just thinking, oh my God, I need back meetings because we're in that kind of like worried state from COVID? Or do you think it is expected from leaders?
I think it's a real mix of factors. I think they're quite early on, when we discovered started using all this video technology, it was people very quickly like, the only meeting that can exist will be a video meeting. And I think now we are rowing back on that a bit, like Noel was saying, and being like, oh, we should do a phone call, or we could do a because we're all exhausted, and we realize that there are other ways to have meetings. I think because of the lack of social connection and kind of spontaneity, we are saying everything has to be a meeting, when it's like, that meeting really could have been an email, right? But you didn't really have to speak to somebody about that. But I think there is a bit of a point about digital presenteeism, and that people are wanting to show that they're working really, really hard, and that they're really, really indispensable. And the way that you show that you are indispensable is that you've got this chock-a-block diary.
Yeah. Right, guys, we've got 9 minutes and 2 questions. We're going to power through them. And I've mixed them around again, because I want to come back to what I'm going to say it now, so you can start thinking in your head. But I'm going to ask you all for one priority of HR and leadership in the next 6 months. We're going to finish on that. The question we're going to do now is, how do you avoid a 2-tier culture? So remote workers versus those in the workplace.
Shall I have a go? Noel will probably be best placed for this, but it's interesting because, again, working for scale-ups who have not had to deal with this in the past, or not international, UK-based, office-based. At Elder, before I joined, they basically decided to be remote first. So even in a hybrid world, and we're going to see how that works, but it's make sure that if a part of the population is not in the office, which is likely to happen, is that the quality of whatever meeting or whatever session there is will be benchmarked on the experience of the people who are remote, as opposed to before where it was, the people in the office had the best experience. So just again, a tactical aspect of it, which will then drive how we organize sessions in the office, how we organize ourselves when we go to the office and then we don't, who's in, who's out. But I think this question is interesting for me because it's not new. Their cultures have always had 2 tiers, 3 tiers, 4 tiers. And I feel that the past few months have almost leveled things off. Is that, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's almost back to Katie's point around, introvert, extrovert. There's some work to do there, and but again, more deliberate work from a more leveled off platform that we used to have. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but in some ways it's almost like you've got a clean slate and you can rethink the way you've done it before, as opposed to before you had learned to live with it.
Yeah.
I'll go next.
Yeah, go for it.
I think it is one of the big challenges now for all organisations, because you just look at us. For most of our offices, we can only get about 50% of people in under COVID. So at any one time, at least half of your organisation is going to be remote. So I think it's one of the things. It's probably similar to the conversation we had earlier. There needs to be a lot more thought and a lot more deliberation about how you do things to make sure that you are including people. And I think for us, it's some of those people who have, for personal reasons, health reasons, anxiety, have sort of hung back a bit. There's a risk that they can become even more isolated over the next few months, and that's one of the reasons we're trying to get everybody to spend at least a day a week in the office, just to try and encourage that interaction and not have sort of haves and have-nots. But I think the biggest challenge we're finding is, of course, if most of the team are together in one location, there's lots of little side conversations that go on that very hard to make sure that you communicate all of that to anyone who wasn't there. And so you need more structure and thinking about how you're going to share information as a team, and also across teams. But I think it's probably the biggest challenge. This isn't the answer to your last question, but I think this is up there with one of the, this is one of the challenges for businesses going forward now, is how do we bring the whole organisation with us through the next phase, which is, from everything we hear, it's probably going to be at least till March.
Yeah, I think it is a really, really big challenge, given that it's probably, to stereotype quite wide, it's probably women that are going to be staying at home, or people with caring responsibilities, or people with long-term health conditions. Or we know that if you are from a kind of ethnic minority background, that you're twice as likely to die of the disease if you catch it. So there's lots of reasons why people might not want to come in, and they are mainly linked to protected characteristics. So I do think there is an inclusivity risk. But I think as Valerie made the point, there's kind of an opportunity there to think about how you rebuild as well. So I think Noel's totally right. It's all about being deliberate. It's about being planning. It's about putting in the structure. And I would just come back to, like, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, management again, and how important it is that managers know how to judge by outputs rather than inputs. So that when we get into a position where we're back in offices or back in workplaces, that you haven't got managers who think that somebody is automatically a better and more committed employee because they happen to be going into the office. And to do that, you need to have kind of measures and metrics that show what good performance looks like. That it's not based on having a bum on a seat in an office.
Yeah, and a perfect example of that is where I'm sitting. There's a guard. You can probably see the gardener behind us. Check his outputs out here. Look at that.
Way.
You can measure all day long how long this dude hangs out in the garden.
High performer.
But that's his output, isn't it? It's there. He doesn't need to send me his how many hours he's been in there.
Yeah.
Guys, let me get back to the questions. Oh, and also just one thing on the happiness index, because I always forget to plug the actual happiness index as well, which is if anyone does want to measure what their culture looks like, the happiness index has a product that do that. So get in touch. But on to the last question, which I've given you a bit of time to think about before we go into wrap up. But what should be the priorities of HR and leadership teams for the next 6 months? And just your one big priority, please, people. Should we go Katie first?
Okay, I can go first. Okay, so I think I would say well-being, which is something we haven't really talked about here as a key priority. I think as we go into winter, it's going to be really, really tough, particularly around kind of mental well-being. And I would link that through to creating a sense of kind of oneness as an organisation when we're all separate. I think that we had at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people treated it a bit like a sprint rather than a marathon. And the longer it goes on, people get very tired, our well-being goes down. We start to resent others, perhaps for our perceptions of them having an easier or better time of it than us. So I think this kind of focus on well-being and also kind of repairing any fractures and fissures within the workforce. I don't have any answers on how to do that, but that would be a priority for me.
It's a great point, Katie. Noel, I'll go to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my number one concern right now is how we make sure that all of the good work we've done on well-being and mental health over the last sort of 6-7 months, we have to sort of turn it up a couple of dials as we go into this next sort of long haul. And I think that's the bit that's different now. We are in it for the long haul. I think, as Katie's right, a lot of people went into this as, we're going to be, as Boris said, sort of in and out of it in a few weeks. It was all quite nice, bit of working from home, the sun was shining. We could go for our hours exercise every day because we were given permission to do that. And, we all followed Joe Wicks and everything else. And now it's sort of, a lot of that's dropped off. People's interest in, Zoom quizzes has dropped away and so on. So, we're kicking off ours this week with World Mental Health Day. We've got a specific session about seasonal affective disorder, and we're just sort of ramping up our effort on well-being and mental health for the winter.
Thanks, Noel. Valerie?
Big priority for us too. I won't continue on that. You've talked a lot about it. So absolutely, that was my number one too. I think the next one really, or actually in parallel, is the cross-team collaboration, is especially for scale-up startups. It's really getting people out of the Zoom funnel that they have within their team, but also getting people to work across teams, and that there's the social aspect for the younger people, which is super important and goes with well-being. But it's also that in order for the business to actually function and thrive and flourish, we need to continue that across team collaboration. I think that's amongst the other big topics, that's an important one.
Thank you. And I think I'll just chip in. When I think 6 months ago, my recommendation for companies was to plan that this period of time will happen for a year, because unless you give your team a sort of a horizon, things like innovation stop because people keep waiting for it to go back to what it was like before. And I've upgraded my recommendation now, which some people don't like, and it does annoy some people, which is I'm planning that the world will be like this for the next 3 years. I hope that it will be better and easier, but it means that the way that we work, we just get on to making stuff like, how do we collaborate when we can't see each other? quicker, so it speeds stuff up. So that's my last bit on there. But my last point is just to say thank you, Valerie, thank you, Noel, and thank you, Katie. You've all been amazing. And as Katie said, I feel like the benefactor here because I've just sucked in all your energy and insight. So I hope our audience have done the same. Thank you for your time.
We did. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Matt.
Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Bye. See ya.
Thank you.